movie called The Critic is going to be particularly intriguing, Mark.
Well, look, just to start with a couple of things in response to what Sir Ian McKellen said there. I mean, you said it's based on a book by Anthony Quinn, Curtain Call. I knew Anthony Quinn as the film critic for The Independent, not theatre critic. Although Ian McKellen says this is very much a Patrick Marber script, that he's gone his own way. I haven't read the book, but when I first started, because I think Anthony Quinn was the film critic. I think he started being film critic in 1998 and was there for a decade or so. The other thing is, you asked about, has he ever sort of fallen out with the critic? And he said, well, there's this person who I'm not going to name who was at the New York Magazine. I'm pretty certain that's John Simon. We'll talk about that in take two, because there's a kind of interesting backstory to that. So the film plays out in the 30s, background of Mosley's black shirts, fascism on the rise, homophobia. And you talked, I thought, very correctly about the fact that this is a character who is gay, and therefore there is their life is complicated by the fact that they're always under threat of arrest and blackmail, and maybe that's something that's kind of feeding into this dyspepsia. However, we should say that if you look at critics in films, are never portrayed particularly, for very good reason, never portrayed as particularly lovable. If you think of like the most famous critics in films, right? Theatre of Blood, Vincent Price is a stage actor who comes back from a watery grave to take Shakespearean revenge on all the critics who gave him bad reviews, including famously feeding Robert Morley a pie with his poodles in it. And there's Lady in the Water, the Shyamalan film in which Bob Balaban is this annoying film critic who ends up meeting a very, very sticky end. And then there's Ratatouille, in which the food critic is Anton Ego, who is a man whose pomposity makes Will Self look positively self-aware. So, not a good track record.
No.
In this particular story, McKellen's critic, he's bitter and twisted by circumstance. He is really of a previous generation of critics, as you said in the interview, in which he has the power to make or break people's careers. That really isn't the case anymore. It hasn't been the case for a while, certainly since the rise of social media. That's definitely changed that. But I think it really did change quite a long time before that. Anyway, he has terrific fun with the role. I mean, he is relishing it. He is relishing the sight of this guy sort of writing this kind of poison pen reviews because he happens to have taken against, an actress played by Gemma Arterton, played rather brilliantly by Gemma Arterton, who's always fabulous. And, we see him berating her for entertainment, and then her signing this kind of Faustian pact with him in return for his approval because his job is in danger. And, without wishing to give anything away about the plot, that's kind of the central thing, is that she agrees to play along with him in order that he doesn't lose his job, and he in return will give her the career that she wants. You mentioned Leslie Manville. It's a small role for Leslie Manville, but I could watch Leslie Manville just, from morning till night. That thing about you gave a very audible performance, that is almost word for word what my mum said the very first time I was on the radio. And I rang her after I'd been on the radio and I said, how was it? And she said, the signal was very clear. That was literally...
Yes, very much the kind of parents trying to find something positive to say.
No, I could hear every word. Yes, so I thought all that worked. Here's my issue. And I do think McKellen is really enjoying the role, and I think he is the best thing about the film. He said he compared it to a 1930s melodrama, a rattling piece of entertainment, stories that kind of rattle along. But the difference with this is it's all too believable. I think the issue is that it isn't believable, that it is indeed a melodrama, a rattling story. And I would go further and say that it's tonally confused. And actually, when you start looking into the history of the film, so the film premiered last year in September at TIFF. And at that point, it was 95 minutes long. And there's an article in Screen Daily which says that it was picked up for distribution, quote, on the proviso that the film was re-edited and key cast were brought back to shoot new scenes written by original screenwriter Patrick Marber. The Critic received mixed reviews when it screened in its original cut. People didn't like the first version. It had a rushed, sour ending that seemed to turn audiences off, but they thought there's a better movie in there, and quote, Patrick had an idea for a different ending that engaged me straight away. So they went back and they did reshoots and and recuts. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, because one of the things that those recuts appear to have done is to bring McKellen's character much more to the fore. It said again in that same article, the new series will bring McKellen's gay, acid-tongued writer more to the fore and create a more commercial and satisfying story for audiences. Now, that was as per the screen day. I said I didn't see the first cut. This is the only cut of it that I've seen. But reading that kind of explained to some extent why it was that I couldn't quite get the tone of it. Because on the one hand, there is this rattling, contrived melodrama yarn with this really delicious performance at the center of it by Ian McKellen. On the other hand, there is the more serious stuff. There is the black shirts. There is the persecution of gay people. There is death. And I thought the film didn't quite know how to negotiate between those two things, that it kept wanting to be taken more seriously than it should be. I mean, if you look at Theatre of Blood, is a comedy horror, right? So we know where we are. There's shocks and there's laughs. This is a ripe melodrama, and an entertainingly ripe melodrama with weird aspiration towards seriousness. I mean, it makes no sense at all, increasingly as we get into the sort of later stages. But that's fine if, as McKellen said, as Sir Ian said, you take it as a 30s melodrama with a rattling plot and and I enjoyed his performance and I enjoyed that, but I thought tonally it was all over the place, and discovering that it had been recut, re-edited, and indeed partially reshot did make me think, okay, that kind of makes sense as to why it is that it's very scattershot. I think it is tonally all over the place.
There's a word that Ian McKellen used to describe his character in the interview, which he said he is curdled.
Yes.
And I think it's a fantastic word, because it does describe, in the same way I think Salieri was curdled by Mozart. There's just, and you meet people like that. It's a fantastic word. Something has changed for the worse. They've gone rotten inside. And I thought that was
well, I mean,
that's the key to him.
There is nobody who has a better turn of phrase than Sir Ian McKellen. And also, even with the technical problems that you spoke about, I could listen to him read the phone book. Yes. I mean,
your views on the Critic, once you've seen it, please, you are the Critic, and then send your views to correspondence@kermode@mayo.com.